Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. And of course, here's your meme of the day brought to you by FiveMind.com. Okay, so that wraps up election night. And I gotta, start off by saying, I guess I was a little bit too optimistic. I thought these races were going to be a whole lot closer, especially looking at Atlas Intel, Trafalgar, some other pollsters who are showing a lot of these races within the margin of error. But I guess those pollsters are going to have to rethink their methodology when looking at these races outside of a Trump general election. Not only were these races not within the margin of error, but they weren't even close. I mean, even Jay Jones won in Virginia. That, I have to admit, is pretty damn wild. And now, of course, you're seeing your usual suspects all over the mainstream media taking a victory lap, which, of course, if we were in their position, we'd do the same thing. But I think it's largely overblown, this notion that these three elections will extrapolate to 2026, or they're indicative of this massive Democrat rise and collapse of the GOP. I'm not exactly comfortable going that far just yet. I don't think it's time to doom and gloom, especially considering these three elections happened all in Democrat strongholds. People could argue, well, Virginia flipped from red to blue. Not exactly true. They elected a Republican governor, I believe, back in 2021, but the circumstances at that time were much different, and obviously a completely different candidate as well. Now, the fact of the matter is, these three states, with these three high-profile elections, or I guess one's a city, these are all places where it's not surprising for Democrats to win by over 10 points. It's actually usually par for the course. So I'm not going to doom and gloom just yet. No, of course not. I'm going to wait to see how polls start moving, and we're going to continue analyzing the polls as we move towards 2026. I'd rather not feed into the Democrat narrative right now. But what I do want to do is talk a little bit about New York City and what's happening with Zoran Mamdani, because I think his rise to power is indicative of a very interesting phenomenon. I think what we're seeing is massive demographic shifts and the rise of anti-Americanism. Basically, the way that I'm viewing it, it seems like New York City is headed towards the path of London. I think what happened in the UK's biggest city is exactly what's now happening in New York City. Let's talk about it. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks. So for me, it's all about demographic shifts. I think one factor is how Ron DeSantis puts it here. Hundreds of thousands of people have fled all of these individual states.
Well, first of all, Jack would have won 4 years ago, and he would have won tonight if you just take all the Republicans who've left New Jersey since I've been governor and moved to Florida. If they could have still voted in New Jersey, he would have won both of those races. Same thing with New York City, maybe not a Republican, but, Giuliani would not be able to win with this electorate the way it is now. Because what happens, Sean, is a leftist politician gets in, whether it's destroying a state like California, Illinois, New York, whether it's a city like New York City or Chicago. And the people that it tends to drive off are the center-right voters. And so when they leave, the resulting electorate is actually more liberal. That's how you go from Lori Lightfoot to Brandon Johnson in Chicago, which is digging the hole deeper. That's why you've gone from 8 years at de Blasio, now leapfrogging here 4, to have Mamdani, who's even going to be worse. And what we found in Florida is, first of all, we're not asking for anyone to move. I mean, people have talked about putting a tariff on people moving in at this point because so many have done so. And I know a lot of people in Florida would think that would be necessary. But here's just the truth. You look at all 49 other states since I've been governor and look at who's migrated to Florida. All 49 more Republicans have moved to Florida than Democrats. Vermont, New York, Illinois, you name it. And the result of that is not just migration, because we've had a lot of people shift within Florida. But when I got elected, we had 300,000 more registered Democrats in Florida. Today, we have 1.4 million more Republicans.
And that right there has essentially ceded ground. You got more traditional Americans who are fleeing to greener pastures like Florida, Nashville, and other places. And then, of course, the counterfactor, which is mass migration, the mass influx of foreigners in places like New York City. The tell for me is right here from Mamdani's victory speech.
Standing before you, I think of the words of Jawaharlal Nehru. A moment comes but rarely in history when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. Tonight we have stepped out from the old into the new. So let us speak now with clarity and conviction that cannot be misunderstood about what this new age will deliver and for whom. This will be an age where New Yorkers expect from their leaders a bold vision of what we will achieve, rather than a list of excuses for what we are too timid to attempt.
So after winning, he didn't quote George Washington or Jefferson or Lincoln. He's not making references to the founding fathers or great Americans who created this great nation. No, he quoted Jawaharlal Nehru, a socialist icon from India, one of their earlier, or I believe their first prime minister, who admired many aspects of the Soviet Union. He was a democratic socialist, in other words, a communist light, and he essentially tried leading a class revolution in the country of India. That tells you all that you need to know. Basically, the message is, we're not playing by the American playbook. He's not putting Americans front and center. No, and he makes that very clear, as he's literally putting, well, pretty much every group but Americans front and center.
I speak of Yemeni bodega owners and Mexican abuelas, Senegalese taxi drivers and Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian line cooks and Ethiopian aunties.
That's the new power coalition in New York City. And this is what I'm calling the London effect, right? That's exactly what we saw in London. A total demographic shift. And honestly, I think the story is less about demographics. It's less about the policy shift and more about the cultural shift. Obviously, there's declining birth rates when it comes to native-born Americans, and for the past couple of decades, the Band-Aid fix has been to bring in as many people as possible from the foreign world. And it feels like there's this growing coalition of foreigners who don't buy into the American values and American way of thinking that built the country in the first place. It feels like what's being imported into the country and what's now being reinforced is an anti-American, grievance-led worldview. America as the oppressor, capitalism as bad, colonialism as the original sin that invalidates everything built in the nation. It feels like these people aren't coming to America to make it home. They're not coming to assimilate and to do it the American way, but rather to rip it all down to shreds and build it in their own image. And the image today seems to be socialism. I guess that's the only alternative. It's almost like cultural devil's advocate. Well, Americans did it this way. Well, we ought to come in and undo all this horrible white American culture that's keeping us down and oppressing us. And a lot of people, I think, have been hoodwinked into thinking that these socialist utopia ideas, that they're something brand new, something never tried before, that's where you get true justice. But as we know, central planning fails each and every time. Mamdani's revolutionary social agenda isn't going to work. It might seem like it's working for a short period of time, but eventually in come the unintended consequences. It's going to happen. It might take 3 years, it might take 4 or 5, it might take 10 years, but it's going to happen. And I think one of the most unfortunate factors here is really the failure of American capitalism. And you might be struck by that statement, but in a lot of ways, this country, I think, has drifted far apart from its initial founding. The government has become bloated. I think what we have today is less of true open markets and economic freedom and more of a big government, quasi-socialism, crony capitalism. And that environment, I think, has led to a lot of the grievances. You've got crony capitalism, bloated government, picking winners, boxing out the old American model. Main Street is dying, industry is dying, jobs are being outsourced. You got these massive oligarch companies that are totally entrenched with Washington and all these paid-off politicians, and they're soaking up more and more and more and more. And I think a lot of people have been hoodwinked. They've been convinced that this is capitalism. The problem is now capitalism. It's late-stage capitalism, but in a way, it's big government. And what's being sold to them is the solution to big government. The solution away from this evil white man's capitalist world is more big government. And that's also being marketed as the anti-colonial view. And it seems to speak to newcomers and immigrants, people who are just getting started in the country and maybe struggling to get a step up. Seems to speak to them very deeply. And I think that is exactly what's happening in New York City. It's a demographic shift. It's a cultural shift. And I think it is a little bit scary. It's a warning sign. I don't think it's how the Democrats are portraying it. And I think in a lot of ways, the Democrat establishment is also scared shitless of it. Let's be real. But again, they want to extrapolate it to the whole country, to the country as a whole. I don't think that's happening. I think it's more regional. I think it's an isolated situation, in this case, specifically in New York City. As the state itself, New York State is moving more right. But obviously, what's happening is massive demographic shifts. What happened in California that turned it from a red stronghold to now the, let's just call it California. I think that's happening in New York City. I think that's happening in other states as well. And then, of course, you've got the flip side of the coin, places like Florida that are becoming increasingly more red. I think the country is becoming more fragmented. But I do also got to say, if we don't nip this one in the bud, if we don't find a solution to this demographic shift, to the declining birth rate, more of this is going to happen. In a way, the country is being commandeered, it's being changed. There seems to be no appreciation for the values, the ideas that built this great nation in the first place. And again, I think New York City is the warning sign for that. Heed the warning, or watch it all fall apart. Anyways, that's what I got for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.